talk a little bit about why we're here, right? So often I think a lot of our organizations think about, we do this legislative work. We probably work within our communities on the municipal level or maybe on the state level. So sometimes I think we have busy seasons and then we have not so busy seasons, but these not so busy seasons are not off seasons. And so I think it's a play on words, but also I wanted just to reiterate that we have to continue to develop plans and include the community in our future planning when we think about our advocacy and our engagement work within our organizations. So today we're going to focus on how our off-season programming could really build trust in our target populations when we're thinking about like unique programming, content, and especially our community inclusion. So a reminder, there is no off-season. There is never an off season. I want to remind you, no days off, okay? It's like you're either doing leg day or arm day. That's it, all right? But there's always more to be done. But I want us to think about what the season is now. Like we've come off of a pretty contentious election season. We've done a lot of voter registration work. We're moving into redistricting. We're moving into municipal elections. We're in probably some states, maybe you have some elections, or maybe you're moving into other types of elections. But there is a period of time, and I feel like we're in that time right now where it's a little bit of a lull. We're kind of waiting on the census data to come back. We've just come off of the heels of, of our legislative sessions. And so there's some time where we can kind of recalibrate, reshift our focus, and get back into the swing of things. But this is really an opportunity right now where we can develop a clearer set of objectives in our organization, so we can really kind of zone in on what those focuses are going to be, and then we can plan for the future as well. So just as a reminder, there is no off season, but there's always a time for us to plan. But now it's a time for spring cleaning. Isn't this little baby so cute, y'all? I mean, then picked up the mop and going to work. But this is really what it's about right now. This is our spring cleaning time, y'all. Like we can do a number of things as we think about not only our administrative and operational kind of goals for our organization, as well as our civic engagement programmatic goals. And so what we need to do if we're thinking about our organizations, reassessing our budget and fundraising approaches. So right now, let's look back at our budget and figure out if our spending is still in alignment with our projections. Do we have everything that we may need? Does anything need to be removed? You need to go, or maybe someone who's in your finance department, or if you don't have a finance department because it's you and you are the end all be all of all things, and I know how it is, y'all. You do QuickBooks, you're doing HR, you're doing everything, and that's okay. But use this time to really reassess your budget line by line. So think about, do we need this extra staff person, or we projected for adding an additional person? Maybe we need 2 people. What is our fundraising goal like? Is there a progress to goal that we have right now? How close are we to our fundraising goal? And what are some of the other things that we can do to make sure we're getting closer to those things? Thinking about our capacity, now I think right now is really a great time for us to really assess our capacity too. So often we get into like the busy season and we recognize that we need more folks on staff, but we should really use this time right now to build up our capacity within our staff. That gives us time to train our folks, that gives us time to fully onboard them, that also gives us time for them to ideate, for them to plan, so they are fully prepared for when the busy season comes back. We know when the census comes, or when we get our census data, some of us are going to go into special sessions. We're going to be doing a lot of work around communities of interest. If we need to hire more organizers, if we maybe need to hire an organizing director, whatever that person may be, or what that role may look like, start thinking about that right now, because I think you are in a really sweet spot of time right now where you can bring someone on and allow them and the rest of your team to kind of ingratiate yourselves with what our plans are going to look like. Think about what a staff retreat is, revisiting our strategic imperatives as well. And so those should always be revisited as we're thinking about the forward vision of our organizations. You want to make sure that you and your team are always on track for meeting the goals of the year. And so you may want to do this by hosting a team retreat over a few days or a week. You want to take the folks away from the work. So we've been in the house for a year. We've been indoors for a year. And so if we're vaccinated, if we feel comfortable, if everyone is socially distant, we're now feeling a little bit better about being in close proximity with folks. So let's figure out a way to bring everyone together in a space that is comfortable for them, possibly ordering lunch, but doing so within maybe you got your entire work day, and that can probably be like your senior leadership team, or maybe even your whole team if you're a small team. But it's a really good opportunity to get to know one another, better understand how you all work together and what your strategic imperatives for the year are going to look like, and not only for this year, but even for the future too. So I can't stress enough. Get together and do a team meeting, even if you're doing it for 2 days. Pick a Thursday, Friday, days that aren't as busy, or your workload may not be as busy, but your clients, your audience, your target population will be understanding that you all may have taken some time away just to recalibrate and to regroup and to make sure that you are able to service them a little bit better when you get back. Also, and that includes like planning for the future. We don't know what the future holds, right? But the future is a lot brighter and is much easier when we actually have some stuff written down and we actually have it planned. And so, and I've talked with Jenny a little bit about this rule. This 5-25 rule, I think, is one that is from Warren Buffett. And so what he estimates is if you have if you have 25 things that are on your list, and I know for organizations much like ours, we subscribe to trying to take care of everything. We try to fix all of the problems of the world, and we just can't, y'all. We really can't. But one thing we should do is pick 5 top priorities for the year and be sure to not deviate from those things. And so come up with a list of 25 options. And if you are going to focus on voting rights or redistricting or low income or Black maternal mortality rates or something, whatever it is, Black mothers' health or whatever the issue is, make sure that you all are choosing whatever those 5 are and stick to it. And I know that may be really difficult to do, but it helps you keep your focus and doesn't allow for your organization to kind of have your eggs in a number of different baskets. And so, you can do this with your team, coming up with the 25 things that you all believe are, the most important things, right? And then actually asking them, well, let's now pick what those top 5 are. And so you can actually use this in your personal life. You can use this, when you're thinking about remodeling your home. This is something that you can use for the future. And so I really do encourage you all, as you're thinking about what your future plans are going to be with your organizations, to use that 5-25 rule. Is actually really helpful. Here's the key though. If you knock off one of those 25 or those top 5, that doesn't mean you're adding another thing to your list. You just only have 5. So choose the 5 wisely, okay? That doesn't mean I knock one off and I'm gonna add number 23 onto that list. No, you just gotta have the 5, and that keeps the organization in line and keeps you all with a strong vision of how you're gonna get there. So what are strategic imperatives? Well, these are initiatives, key projects probably, or even some of the major objectives that are high leverage and systemic, which are your strategic part of it, and must do, which are imperative, over maybe the next 6 to 12 months, that significantly moves your team or the organization towards its vision or your desired culture. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you can actually use strategic imperatives to further your planning and your visioning for the organization. So these are the top 5 things you want to consider as you're developing your strategic imperatives, right? Consider these are the considerations for your framework of the planning. And so this is really an essential tool that you can use to not only evaluate your progress, but highlight those roadblocks that you may be running into and identifying the resources that you may need. So these top 5 are your tactics, the task, resources that you may need, who's going to be responsible for those things, and then what your timing is. So we're going to dig in a little bit more on what those look like. So the first are your tactics. Your tactics have to be defined on what your strategic imperatives are. You can have a number of strategic imperatives for your organization, but you don't want to list no more than about 3 tactics to actually help you get there. So typically, if you have more than 3, these are not necessarily tactics, but it's actually the imperative itself. And so that may actually need to change. So what makes a powerful tactic is the importance is the overriding need. So how important is the actual strategic imperative? Because it should be a pretty definable thing. So when you're thinking about your tactic, no more than 3 tactics. And I'll actually have an example here when we run through all 5. Then you want to identify the task. And so you want to actually list exactly what the task is that is needed to meet the identified imperative, right? So this could be in a list form, but this is really generally what steps are actually needed for you to get there. So it's really good to name these things. So there's clarity amongst the team on what we need to do to get there. And these are like those small rocks, like those small nuggets of actually getting to the larger goal. So those are what those tasks may be. Your time, money, and people. Now, these are the resources. Now, we all know that time, money, and resources are probably some of the most finite things that are available or less finite things that are available to us, right? So these 3 dimensions are usually aggregated, but they really do define what your level of investment is going to be. And it also helps you understand what the capacity is too. So who do you need to help you get there? Do you need to bring on another person to help you meet this goal? Do you need to, kind of shift your pivot your attention in another direction? But really, this is like all of the activities that this particular individual would be responsible for and kind of what it is that they need. So do we need to raise more money for this particular item? Do we need to hire more folks for this particular item? Do we need to, whatever the case may be, but you want to identify what the resources are, because this again helps you to clarify what your strategic imperative is and all of the things that are needed to meet it. And so usually, and I think this part is very important, is very telling, usually because the biggest bottleneck is an overburdened individual. And so it's important too to notice when you're listing your strategic imperatives here, that if you notice that there is one person that is usually being named as the person to take care of it, we're not delegating the task well enough. That person usually is the one who's probably more seasoned and maybe overworked to help meet the goal. And so you want to be able to spread out some of this responsibility with other team members as well. And I know that this is something that smaller teams, and particularly for smaller organizations, this is something that we run into pretty often, right? So we want to make sure that we are sharing the love with everyone, that this is a shared responsibility we all have. So Stan can't do everything. Stacy can't do everything. But if we start to notice that Stan is the person that is listed as the person who is going to take care of this particular task, we may need to reevaluate what is the capacity of some of our other folks and how do we continue to build them up so they're probably on par or could help share some of that load that Stan has. And then responsibility and timing, which is number 4 and 5, these two go hand in hand. So these are the who and the when of the initiative that we're working on, right? And so the person responsible must also have the authority and the encouragement to be able to complete this task. So who's responsible for it? How much time do they need? Be realistic about the time that you need, right? Like, because you're on the ground and because you may be like the the person who knows how to do something quickly, understand that your team, which is I think why it's so important to do the staff retreat, to understand the capacity of your folks too, because everyone isn't, a senior organizer, right? But you do want to be able to share the responsibility with the rest of the team, because our goal is to build everybody up. We want to make sure that everyone can get the skills that they need so they can move up the ladder, or if they move past your organization, that they can, they'll get another position where they would be in leadership. But you want to set realistic goals and timelines, but actually that you're able to still make your own project as well. And I think too, as you are always thinking, and I feel like I may not need to say this to this group, but there are always race, equity, and inclusion considerations that you have to make for the work that you're doing. So what is the impact of this? Is there an impact to some communities that they may not be able to participate in? So if we want to do more rural work, if we want to go to more rural areas, we do have to account for the fact that there's a digital divide there, that there's not a lot of folks that may not have, the opportunity to be able to go online and to sit in on a webinar. So we may have to do in-person events in some of these areas. So those are things too that we also have to consider while we're doing our strategic visioning and doing some of our planning as well. So this is just a little bit of an example, but if this was strategic imperative number 3, and I think, was expanding our rural engagement outreach, we have it in these 5 buckets, right? So our tactics, our task, our resources needed, the responsibility, and the timing. So if we want to expand our rural engagement outreach, our tactic is we're going to host listening sessions in rural areas. And we're also going to develop deeper relationships with leaders in rural communities. Now, this is just an example. This is not an exhaustive list because we know we can do so much more, right? But just for the purposes of this example. So our task would be, we need to choose 3 to 5 areas that we're going to host these sessions. And then when we're thinking about deepening those relationships, we want to identify the community organizations that are in those areas and start with the existing initial list that we may have. So we may have a list of pastors. We may have a list of maybe some local elected officials that we may have a good relationship with. And we can call those folks and start to ask them and do a little bit of that mining of who exactly do we need to start building relationships with in those areas. Then when we think about resources needed, how much is each session going to cost? So maybe each session, if we're talking about in person, even if they're virtual, depending on what our curriculum is going to be, are we doing like, a fellowship or whatever it may be? There are costs that may be incurred to reserve the space. There's gas that we may have to incur when we're actually driving to the area, in the rural area, and food and all of those things. And so these are things that we just want to make sure that we are considering around what our strategic imperative is. And then if we're, talking about those relationships, we may need to hire some interns or some fellows to be able to help us with this information mining too. And so what is the cost going to be there? Now that's, I put to be determined, because that number can change depending on the organization and the budget, right? But that's something that we also need to consider. And so you and your team can actually talk about those things together. Then whose shoulders does this fall on? And so this is where, we would probably talk about a MOCA, which is like your manager, your organizer, who is going to be approving these types of projects or whatever, but whose responsibility is it to do these things? And so this may be the organizing director for these listening sessions, or for the executive director to build these relationships, or it may be the entire team. We want the entire team to call through, these areas, because everyone has a relationship with a number of people. And then thinking about our timing. And so we want to do 3 to 5 sessions. These must be completed by August of this year. So that means, we're now about to broach May. we've got a few months, but we don't have that much time. So we need to start getting the ball rolling. And then as we start to develop these deeper relationships, we want to have made some of these calls by the end of May to make sure that we've done that too. So just an example, but really something to consider as we're thinking about what strategic imperatives actually are, when we're thinking about what they look like. And if we have maybe 5 or 6 strategic imperatives for the year, this is the way that we can kind of organize our thoughts with our team and within ourselves to make sure that we're staying on track. We talked about there is no off season, but some objectives that you can consider for your off season engagement. There's a few things you can do. We talked about spring cleaning, which is like getting your house in order, right? But then we can learn a little bit more about our target populations as well. And I think this is the perfect time to be able to do that. We can do some testing and polling. And so when we talk about learning more about our target population, these are some ways that we can do it. Testing and polling, I don't know if there's a more perfect time than like right now before we actually get back into a more busy season to know a little bit more about our populations. This is our time to get intimate with them, to really have real conversations and understand the folks that we're servicing. So if we can maybe administer a test or a poll, if there's some kind of hypothesis that you want to test, or something that you really want to better understand, now is the time to do it. Some of these are maybe a little they may not be as expensive as you think they are, but there are also opportunities for us to administer some of these polls as well. Really testing and polling, I think, is an incredible way to really understand where your folks are, what they're thinking about, what their behaviors may be around a particular type of issue or something that may have happened. But also, and I think to Sarah Beth's point, it really does help you further develop your messaging, because sometimes we may think we know what the message may be, but our poll is going to tell us something else. Now, the poll is always only for the moment. And so I think we also need to stress that too, because folks' opinions change as public opinion changes, as it does, or as as things continue to evolve and engagement continues to develop. But it's really just a snapshot of how folks are feeling kind of in that moment. But I think it's good to always understand who your folks are and what they care about and why they care about it. So if you do have the funds available, I would encourage you to run a test. Maybe it's a poll, whether it's one of those live calls, or maybe it's something, if you may not have as much money in your budget, you can still administer a poll. You could probably do it online too. Now, online is a little more tricky because there's less, I think, you're able to kind of tie some of the issues to a direct person. So you have a little less, I don't know what the word is, but it's not as, I think, as well developed as a live poll would be. But there are some ways you can do it, or you can do listening sessions or focus groups. And that's the next one. So that's another way that you can engage your community. These can be informal and they can also be formal. So focus groups are another portion of testing and polling that you can do, but you can also do a focus group that's a little bit more informal. You can host a listening session maybe around the state, maybe around your area, maybe around the community that you serve. But it's good to know what your folks care about. And you want to get a representation of your community. So through the people that you're polling or that you're doing your listening session with, these are intimate groups and probably no more than about maybe 10 folks or less, where you're actually just having an open conversation with them about the issue. Maybe something just passed in the legislature and you really want to get feedback on maybe Black men in voting, or you want to talk to Black mothers around, maternal health. You want to talk to young people, or you want to talk to folks between the ages of 18 to 25 on civic engagement, or whatever the case may be. But this is really, I think, an awesome way to understand the community that you're serving and hear a little bit more about what those issues are. And I can say, there's one story where I think when we were working at the caucus with Leader Abrams, We went to Macon to do, I think, a listening session. And what we realized is that we wanted to talk about Medicaid expansion because it's a super important issue. But what we ended up finding out, like with one of the bigger issues was that the Department of Transportation literally cut the Black neighborhood in Macon in half with 75, literally ran the interstate right through it. Mm-hmm. And that was something that we had to that we had to consider in the results that in our conversations that we were having with folks, that wow, of course we care about Medicaid expansion. I think folks do care about it, but they actually really care about transportation in this particular area. You really want to stay in touch with your folks, right? Do check-in calls. Now, the young people these days, now, Leader Abrams would get on to us because now, and I think because maybe we're older millennials, right? Like, we know the value of still making a phone call, like picking up the phone and talking to someone, but an email just ain't gonna cut it, y'all. People need to actually talk to you. So periodically, I just say pick up the phone and talk to your community leaders, talk to your elected officials, do some call time with them, and really like continue to get a sense for what is actually happening on the ground. And I tell you, that it does a world of difference for your engagement with the community, but also like they will continue to look at you as like a first line to go to if there is ever an issue. That also like establishes that you care about the community, but that you are continue to be a resource for them as well. So do your check-in calls, pop up on somebody or schedule a meeting or a one-on-one after your busy season, just to see how things are going and how you can continue to support. I think one of the best things that I've ever heard, or what I've really learned from Leader Abrams too, is whenever she's in any meeting, what she asks is, how can I help you? And that's what you want to be able to do. How can you help whoever it is that you're meeting with? So stay in touch with folks. It really does mean a lot. I also want to offer too, like when we're thinking about buy-in, also encourage your elected officials to join you in some of these listening sessions. And so I know it sometimes we as C3s it gets a little tricky, but if they are a sitting elected official, they can attend. So have them come or host a town hall meeting. And that's one of the other things. And we talked about town hall meetings in our last webinar, so I didn't want to include it here. But when we're thinking about our listening sessions, and particularly around some of the issues that are happening in our areas, include the decision makers in it too and have them listen in, or at least show them to them, because you don't want to, create a space where folks don't feel like they can actually talk about it, but let them know, like have them see the results. Have them understand like what folks are actually talking about in their area so they can hear it too. And make sure that that develops and deepens your relationship with the elected officials as well. So that's also a really good point. But thank you so much, Lenisa, always for that. Now we're going to talk about what else can we do. This off season, we talked about spring cleaning. We talked about collaboration, or what did we just talk about? Learning our population. But we got to educate too. If something just happened, whether it's on the state or local level, it is our job to be the information source for our communities. And so we can use this time right now to educate our community on issues that matter or information that isn't widely shared. So if there's a new law that's passed that a lot of folks don't know about, and I can say specifically here in Georgia with the anti-voting rights legislation that passed, it is our job now to do the education around it. It is now law, unfortunately, but we have to help folks understand, how do you vote now? We had all of these people come out to vote. It was a great thing. But how do we make sure that information is synthesized in a way that we can actually build on education? And so we have to be able to educate the general public too. So maybe it's hosting some virtual workshops, developing some social media or ad campaigns on the issue, partnering with elected officials who are champions on a particular issue. We can host campuses. Now we can now get back on those doors, be socially distant. I am all for going out on the doors or doing a phone bank or doing a text bank right now and sharing information. If we want to talk about, HR1, or if we want to talk about, Medicaid expansion or whatever the issue may be in the area, After you've done your polling and you've recognized what the issue is, then you can start doing education and getting more folks involved and sharing that, so that we have a more informed, an informed base of population. Collaboration, I think, is important too. Collaborate with organizations who do have connections to populations that you may not have connections to, or may have a more trusted voice in that particular population. Collaborate with them. Um, Let them know that this is something that you want to make sure that everyone has access to, because they may be housing insecure or whatever the case may be. So you can partner with another organization who can help provide those resources, or help you do a phone bank or do a text bank, or maybe you're setting up shop, in the corner of different parts of the city, or whatever the case may be. I think sometimes we have to get outside of the traditional modes of what our engagement looks like, because our populations may be so transient that we have to catch them where they may be. So if it's being closer to a bus stop, if it's maybe being on corners, if it's texting folks where that they're in apartment buildings, or in senior homes, or wherever we may know that there are populations that would need this type of service. We've got to get really creative to meet them wherever they may be. And I think also too, making sure that we have strong ad and social media campaigns too, like maybe having a donor maybe gift us something, so we can put something, an ad at a bus stop, or maybe on one of the regulators around the city, where we see a lot of these. I know here in the city of Atlanta, there's a lot of like rap album things that are on some of these regulators around the city. But if we can put information that we may need around the new voting laws, we have to be very creative and be as big in our marketing approach as some of the bigger brands are as well. So I hope that answers your question, but I think those are some ways that we can think about that. And there's also that ID tool there. And I think another thing, and we've talked about this, I think, a number of times, but I'm not going to let up on this, is storytelling. We have to tell our story. We have to tell our stories, y'all. You all are doing some amazing, amazing work. And people need to know that not only are you a resource, that you are a resource of information, that you are an issue expert, but that you all service a community where you can help uplift their voice as well. So I really do want you all to consider, in this time right now, consider what a social media campaign will look like. See if you can find an intern or a fellow or someone who can help you develop your storytelling platform. Get some folks in front of a camera, have them talk about some issues. I'm telling you, you will not only raise your profile and your name recognition, but you will also help a lot of people that need the support that you're able to offer. I hope that this time together has been fulfilling for you as you think about what the rest of 2021 is going to look like, and as you think out forward to 2022. There's so much work that I know that continues to be done. So we can't do it all, but I really do hope that this at least helps you organize your thoughts a little bit as we think about what the off season looks like, and how do we be bold in the way that we move forward with our planning. So please continue to go off and do all of the great work and save the world for us. And we'll see y'all.